Over the last couple weeks, we've had power outages a couple of times now in the middle of Mass, which is really convenient for all of us. And I have to find out why. I've noticed that in both times, Deacon Luke was assisting me. I blame him. Some help. I remember when and I use this word gently, fad came out surrounding WWJD. What would Jesus do? Started to show up on those gum bracelets that people still wear, and it showed up on t-shirts and bumper stickers, and then it was everywhere. WWJD, meant to inspire us as a community of disciples to consider what would Jesus do. Then other people got a hold of it, and what would Jesus do very quickly became, we want Jack Daniels. And then it became all sorts of other things that had nothing to do with Jesus. Which is okay, that's what happens. I have always struggled with the question. Not because I'm trying necessarily to avoid it, but rather because I've never thought it was necessarily the best question to guide us in all moments. What would Jesus do? Well, he multiplied loaves and fish. I got to go to Wegmans. He raised people from the dead. I so far have not pulled off the feet. He spent almost all of his time teaching adults. And other than acknowledging them as members of the community, he doesn't address children at all. I have spent the majority of my priestly life attempting to teach young people. Jesus did not work from a budget. Good pastors do all the time. Jesus' earthly ministry lasted 3 years. Mine is 18 and the clock's still running. He was crucified. Well, I've had my bumps and bruises along the way, but nobody has attempted as yet to execute me. So I keep playing around and around, and I keep coming up with these contrasts, at least in my own mind, where what would Jesus do is not probably an option. I can come up with an answer of what Jesus would do. It just doesn't help me decide what I'm going to do. Because I'll be honest, turning water into wine's a useful trick. I just don't have that club in the bag. And I suspect that none of us do. So why would we ask that question? Bishop Troutman, may he rest in peace, he landed on the real question we should be asking is this: what would a disciple of Jesus do? That's one solution. And it works. Paul's letter to the Romans, though, reminds us why the question matters. Not necessarily as a moral compass, although it couldn't hurt. I personally think that what would a disciple do is a more thoughtfully guiding question most of the time. But what would Jesus do gets to an important point for us, and it's this. Let's be clear about what Jesus did. What would Jesus do invites us to consider the critical question. What did Jesus do? There are all kinds of possibilities for what he could do or what God could do or what we could do. It's important for us to note what he did. And Paul's letter to the Romans brings us to the central crux of it. My brothers and sisters, are you unaware that we who have been baptized into Christ have been baptized into his death? Call it divinization, call it theosis, call it whatever you want to. But in the big picture, what Jesus did was open the pathway by which we, through grace, can ascend to the Father and become as gods. Our ancestors in faith understood this, that what we're talking about when we're talking about salvation is the ascent of the person to the Father made possible by the grace given us through Christ. Becoming like Christ is the task and the project and the gift of discipleship. Because it is in becoming like Christ that we ascend to the Father. And so when Paul in his letter to the Romans lays out, are you unaware that we who have been baptized into him have been baptized into his death? He's making an argument that his life becomes the pattern of life for all disciples, for all members baptized into his body. Not necessarily in terms of every single moral decision, that's more complicated, but in the big picture and in the final analysis, our ascent to God. We follow the pattern of Christ. Be aware that we who have been baptized into his body have been baptized into his death, so that we might be baptized into his life. All of it. Not just the cross, but also the empty tomb. What did Jesus do? Jesus opened for us the way to the Father and has offered us the grace of baptism so that we might go to the Father with him.